When it comes to ranking NBA players, it is always highly controversial. And for Fox Sports analyst Nick Wright, for a couple years, he's doing a yearly ranking of the best players ranked by tier in a pyramid-style system. Now, most of the time, these rankings aren't offensively bad. But this time, one of his player pyramids was so awful, I had to react to it.
Ooh. We have Nikola Jokic, LeBron James, Anthony Davis, and Ja Morant. And Ja, this last month of, I don't even know what to call it, but everything that he's gone through outside of basketball notwithstanding, he has been the best player on a team that could win the title. And I think he showed you he was on that trajectory last year. Anthony Davis has been having, I think, the best season of his career as a Laker this year when he's been out there. LeBron's numbers are off the charts, and Jokic, we know he's two-time MVP.
Now, that right there is the first tier of Nick's pyramid. Now, off the bat, I have a few problems. First up, he has Ja Morant a full tier ahead of Damian Lillard. When looking at Dame this year historically, he's had an all-time great season for a scoring guard, averaging 32.3 points, 7.3 assists, 4.7 boards on 47, 38, and 92 splits. His scoring average actually is higher than Steph Curry's highest, which came back in 2021. And speaking of scoring, this year Dame has had 14 games of 40-plus points, the most in the NBA, 3 games of 50-plus points, the second most, and 2 games of 60-plus points, again the most. The biggest knock on Dame this year is his Portland team isn't very good, as when he plays, they're only 26 and 29, and so a bottom-feeding team in the Western Conference. And while that isn't great, once again, Dame's individual play and individual value is off the charts, as Portland's offense with him on the floor has an offensive rating of 121.6. That is on pace to the best in the NBA. Compared to without him, we're at 109.5, which would be on pace to the worst in the NBA. If you want to talk offensive value, Dame this year is the most valuable guard in the entire NBA. And one argument Nick could have as why Dame isn't in this tier is because of defense. But looking at this tier, there are 3 guys who aren't great or good defenders. Which begs the question, where is SGA? As much like Dame, offensively, he's been fantastic, averaging 31.3 points, 5.5 assists, 4.8 boards on 51, 35, and 91 splits. Now, unlike Dame Lillard, SGA is an elite perimeter defender. This year, having the same defensive win shares as Drew Holiday and the same defensive plus-minus as Evan Mobley. The only thing you can criticize SGA for is his team is only 29 and 30 when he plays. But in reality, that's the exact same win percentage as LeBron James, Anthony Davis when they're on the court. And like those 2 players, SGA isn't hurt nearly as much. And one thing I do want to make known, Kawhi Leonard at worst deserves an honorable mention to be in this tier. As at the start of the season, he got off to a very, very slow start, only averaging around 17 points per game. But since the new year, he's turned it on to 2019 Kawhi levels, averaging 28.6 points, 6.8 boards, 3.9 assists, on an insane 53, 50, and 92 splits. For this so-called bottom tier, I would swap Ja Morant out for Dame Lillard and SGA, or at the very worst, put Dame and SGA in the same tier as Ja. And when it comes to Kawhi Leonard, he's right there with those guys at the cusp of this tier.
Third row, top 6 guys in the league. Steph Curry, Jason Tatum, and Kevin Durant. These guys are undeniably great. Steph and Durant obviously have full resumes. Tatum is in the midst of building his. To me, these guys are, had they played the requisite games, are obviously first-team caliber All-NBA guys. Tatum's the only one that's going to end up making it this year because of games played.
Now, you guys know at this point, I defend Jokic ad nauseum. And I'm not the biggest Jokic fan, but these guys give you so much content other than bashing Jokic, you by default have to defend him. As looking at Jokic, you guys know the stats. He's averaging 25, 12, and 10 on ridiculous shooting. We've all seen the numbers, we know the impact, and still, he's underrated and undervalued. As looking at this tier, Nick Wright has Tatum ahead of Jokic, the two-time MVP. And to be clear with you guys, I'm a Celtics fan and a big Tatum supporter. But at this point, I can't put Tatum on that Jokic level, as even at age 25, he has weird stretches where he can't hit his shot and doesn't show up for pivotal games. And looking at his post-All-Star break stats, they're still very good and top 10 level. But compared to Jokic, the two-time MVP, it's not what you would expect, as Tatum is only shooting 43% from the field and is sub 30% from behind the arc. Yes, JT is a much better defender than Nikola Jokic, but in Boston, he's playing alongside Jaylen Brown, who arguably is more consistent and a more steady option from game to game. As looking at JB, his post-All-Star break stats are actually better than Tatum, averaging more points, shooting better from the field, as well as three.
My personal preference for who I like better as a player is Luka Doncic over Jokic. But I think if you look at it objectively, you have to say Jokic has 2 MVPs, Luka has 0. They've both been to the conference finals. Jokic, neither is a good defender, but I think Jokic is less of a defensive liability than Luka.
Who do you trust more in the playoffs?
Luka's team is ninth.
But who do you...
Luka's team is in the play-in.
It's not an MVP vote.
No, but a lot of times when you rank guys, you list their accolades.
No, but
he's got more accolades. They've both been the same length in the playoffs.
But who do you think's a better playoff player?
So in that clip right there, you saw Nick Wright kind of dodge the question and dance around the actual argument. As looking at Jokic and Luka, Chris Broussard brought up some very valid points. But Nick Wright's only response was saying, quote, "Who is the better playoff performer and who do you trust more in the playoffs?" Now, objectively speaking, looking at Luka and Jokic as individuals, I trust both these guys equally come postseason time. As looking at Luka, his playoff play has been amazing these past 2 years, averaging 33 points, 9.2 boards, 7.6 assists on 47-37 and 70 splits, compared to the Joker, who averaged 30.2 points, 12.1 boards, 5.3 assists on 53-35 and 84 splits. Looking at those stats right there, you could definitely say Luka Doncic, as of late, has been a better playoff performer with more success. But still acknowledge, the gap in playoff resume and playoff play isn't that ginormous. And going off what Chris Broussard said, Jokic in many ways is the big man version of Luka, and Luka is the guard version of Jokic, as both these guys are great triple threat offensive players who can pass, shoot, and rebound, and at the same time are pretty meh defenders. And when it comes to debating who is the better playoff guy, I was a little curious. Has Nick Wright's criteria always been about the playoffs and that's how he ranks players in his tier system? And looking back at 2021, when it came to Luka Doncic, before making the West Finals, he had him above Jokic, Kawhi, Dame, Joel, and the same tier as Steph Curry, a multi-time NBA champion. At the very least, Nick Wright seems a tad biased towards Luka, and maybe, just maybe, has a grudge against Nikola Jokic.
Right now, the 3 best players, and they're the 3 that the last 3 years have been the top 3 in MVP, Giannis, Embiid, and Jokic.
Yeah, I don't think that Jokic is better than Luka Doncic, which gets us to our top 2, which is Embiid and Luka. Embiid could have won the MVP each of the last 2 years. Luka was my pick for MVP last year. The team has not won enough for him to win MVP this year. His numbers are off the charts. And then we can also show you, of course, at number 1, it's undeniable. It's Giannis.
Now, once again, stopping it right there, I do find it very interesting, as well as confusing, when it comes to Nick Wright. His deciding factor for putting Jokic in tier 3 was his playoff play compared to Luka. But at the same time, he puts Joel Embiid, who has never made the conference finals, in the same tier as Luka and ahead of the Joker. And looking at individual play, these past 2 seasons comparing Embiid and Jokic, the Joker averages more points, assists, rebounds on a higher field percentage, 3%, free throw percentage, with less turnovers. If you say Joel Embiid is a better defender, I will not disagree with you. But in terms of recent playoff play, Nikola Jokic at worst is on Embiid's level, and I would heavily argue he's been better and more consistent than Joel.
So there it is, the top of the player pyramid. I think right now, Brew, the best player in the league.
That's great.
We're in the same spot we were in the mid-2000s and in the early 90s, where there is not allowed to have another opinion. I don't think you're allowed to have and be taken seriously if you say anyone other than Giannis the best player in basketball.
So at the very end of this clip for Nick Wright, we have at least some common ground, agreeing Giannis is the best player in basketball. And to this point, he's the first seed, averaging 32, 12, and 5, and dominating on both ends. And to be fair to Nick Wright, as a critic, I will also give my tier list of the best players in the NBA. In Tier 1, I would have Giannis, just like Nick Wright. Tier 2, Jokic, Curry, Durant, and Luka. Tier 3, Joel Embiid, Tatum, AD, LeBron James. Tier 4, Dame, SGA, Kawhi, and Ja Morant. So, as always, thank you guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you next time.